What's going on, Guardians? It's Tizzle here, and at long last, I'm bringing you the Damage Over Time Warlock build. If you're a fan of my channel, you may have seen me using this build in some solo GMs. Well, I've also taken it through Master Lost Sectors, and I can confirm it is one of the best builds in the entire game. For a very long time, I've talked about how amazing Damage Over Time is as an effect in Destiny 2. The first real dot weapon was Anarchy, and it quickly became one of the strongest weapons in the game for years and years. Pairing it with Mountaintop was the meta strategy in the early days of Grandmasters, and that was because you could tick a champion's health down and then use your anti-champion weapon at the same time to keep it stunned. This functionality is still powerful to this day, though less needed thanks to power creep and having the ability to basically insta-kill a champion with a Consecration Slam. But I digress. The existence of OP shit like Consecration doesn't negate the power of Damage Over Time, and this build takes full advantage of all the DOT effects we have in Destiny 2. So let's jump into it and break it down. The build centers around one of the most powerful and underrated exotics in Destiny, Necrotic Grip. It has the intrinsic armor perk Grasp of the Devourer. Damaging a target with melee poisons them, dealing increasing damage over time. Defeating a poisoned target spreads a condition. Provides a moderate benefit to the airborne effectiveness stat of all weapons of sorrow. On every single video where I use this exotic, people say, what about using the exotic class item variant? So I want to address that here. To me, the power of this exotic comes from the ramping up of the damage that the poison does, and the exotic class item variant does not ramp up in damage. It does still spread the poison after a kill, which is great for ad clear, but you may have noticed our abilities are really strong and can clear enemies quickly anyways. On top of this, I run my builds through GM content, so the ramping up in damage actually matters there and is extremely helpful for taking out beefier targets. So yes, you can run the exotic class item version if you want, but I steer clear of those because my favorite thing to do in Destiny is to get the most out of any exotic, and this build does just that. It full sends into the Damage Over Time fantasy. So now that we know what the exotic does, let's have a look at our abilities and aspects. One thing I love about this build is how flexible it is. You can run any super you like, though Song of Flame is by far the best even without Solar Surge this season. The reason for this is threefold. First, it's just simply the best super in the game, full stop. It gives insane damage resistance, radiant, and it lets you use your weapons while in super, which is something that is unique to it versus any other roaming super in the game. I have a whole video breaking down why this super is so great, so give that a watch after this. But for now, just know that it pairs perfectly with this build. The snap melee in your super can ignite targets, but it also poisons the enemies, and you can snap on enemies pretty much constantly during the super. In fact, I recommend not even using your grenade as the snap uses less of your super and you get the benefit of poisoning targets that don't die right away. The next amazing thing about it is it refunds all your abilities, so you could chuck out 3 Arcane Needle melees to poison a bunch of enemies, then pop super and destroy even more enemies, and then come out of your super with all your melee charges back. It's incredible. For my Rift, I run Phoenix Dive as this actually gives me my class ability back quicker, but depending on the content, a Healing Rift may be more beneficial. The choice is yours. I mentioned it a second ago, but we definitely want Arcane Needle melees. These give us 3 melee charges, which means triple the poison spreading. But on top of this, your melee also unravels enemies. This is just yet another source of free damage over time, which helps us lean into that dot fantasy. And then we have Cold Snap grenades. Cold Snaps are amazing for freezing loads of targets so you can deal with other enemies or take them out with a nice shatter. And if you do this, you get a ton of Darkness Transcendence energy, which is really nice. A lot of my builds build Transcendence energy like crazy, but none do it as quickly and easily as this. It's honestly so free, and that is because you don't have to deal active damage to get the energy. It's all passive. But I will get back to that in a minute. For now, just know that Cold Snaps are really good with this build. But really, you can run whatever grenade you like. So that's what we have for our abilities. What about our aspects? The first aspect you want to run is Devour. It's just so damn good at keeping you alive, and it gives you grenade energy for kills while it's active, so yeah, it's just kind of a no-brainer. I always call it Devour, but it's technically Feed the Void. The other aspect you want to run is Hellion. This gives you a solar turret for a whopping 20 seconds, and this turret causes ignitions which are really powerful, and it applies Scorch, which is just another free damage over time effect. You could also run Bleak Watcher in place of either of these aspects if you like, but for me, this is the best combination. And Bleak Watcher has one massive downside, as do Cold Snap grenades for that matter, but you can control Cold Snaps a little easier and use them in more intelligent situations, where Bleak Watcher lasts a long time and just kind of shoots whatever it wants. So if you poison an enemy and then freeze it, it loses that poison effect. This is a really shitty interaction, and I hope it is unintended and Bungie can fix it. Please report this issue on the Bungie.net website so that they can maybe get it patched. But anyways, this means that if you want to run a different grenade than Cold Snap, by all means go ahead. But I just found them to be really good with this build. They can handle unstoppables and freeze a mass amount of enemies. And then if you throw an Arcane Needle at them while frozen, they will still get poisoned and do shatter damage. It is just if the enemy is poisoned first and then frozen that it loses the poison status effect. Anyways, I just wanted to point out that weird interaction and make the point that for damage over time, Hellion is a far superior option than Bleak Watcher. But Bleak Watchers are still useful if you're dealing with overloads. And like I said, if you don't care about Devour, then you could also just run Bleak Watcher and Hellion for even more damage over time shenanigans. And speaking of Devour real quick, another crappy interaction is that if the poison damage kills the enemy, it will not proc Devour. I actually learned this the hard way when I was soloing the Warden of Nothing strike. I was in the boss room and I didn't get a Devour proc when I was expecting it and I wound up dying. So that's just another helpful thing to know. So earlier, I was talking about Transcendence. Something I learned while grabbing a bit of footage for the video is that the poison tick damage actually counts as kinetic damage, meaning it gives a bit of Transcendence energy to both the light and darkness Transcendence meter. Now, I want to be clear, this isn't a ton of energy or anything, but it is also just passive gains, and when combined in conjunction with the other things we have going on, it allows us to build Transcendence exceptionally quickly. So now let's look at the fragments which work to really take this build to the next level. First, we have Facet of Protection. This one is totally optional, but I like that it gives us some damage resistance to help with survivability, and it also gives us plus 10 to strength so we can have our melee ability up more often. The next one, however, is mandatory, and that is Facet of Devotion. Defeating targets afflicted with stasis or strand debuffs grants bonus light transcendence energy. This also gives us plus 10 to strength, but the reason it is so good is thanks to our arcane needles. These apply Unravel, and that means most enemies that we kill will benefit from this fragment. This helps fill our light transcendence even quicker, and the Unravel projectiles give us free darkness transcendence energy. Next, we have Facet of Ruin. Increases the size and damage of the burst when you shatter a stasis crystal or frozen target, and increases the area of effect of solar ignitions. So we chuck out a Cold Snap quite a bit with this build, so you're benefiting from the better shatters quite a bit. And then we can proc solar ignitions with our Song of Flame super or our Hellion, so we benefit from this fragment a whole lot. Then we have Facet of Balance. Rapidly defeating targets with light damage grants melee energy, and rapidly defeating targets with darkness damage grants grenade energy. This one is obviously nice as it just feeds back into our melee and grenade abilities, allowing us to spam them even more frequently. And then finally we have Facet of Dawn. Causing damage with a powered melee makes us radiant. We are constantly throwing our melees with this build, so we may as well get a free 25% damage from them. So I mentioned how Song of Flame refunds our abilities, while Transcendence also gives us our abilities on a very quick cooldown. It refunds our grenade as well when we're done, but while being Transcendence we are able to chuck out a ton of melees. So this means even more poison and unravel effects. Trust me, when you get this build rolling, you are just constantly cycling between your super and then spamming transcendent abilities, and then your regular abilities, and then before you know it, you have a super again, and the loop just never really ends, so long as there are enough adds around for you to kill. If you are unaware, constant tick damage sources give massive amounts of super energy, and this build is honestly the king of that. Because of this, the mod section is going to be quite short. You can pretty much run whatever you want on the helmet, but I recommend siphon mods and a heavy ammo finder. On the gloves, I go with Momentum Transfer, Impact Induction, and Focusing Strike, as these all help to feed our abilities whenever we use other abilities. So it just allows us to have even more uptime to constantly be spamming abilities. It's nuts. On the chest, just run whatever resist mods suit the activity. On the legs, really you can go with anything, but mods that give ability energy back when you pick up an Orb of Power are probably the best here. But you do you. Then on the class item, again it really doesn't matter, but I do like Bomber and Outreach for a chunk of grenade and melee energy when we use our class ability. So that is basically the build. Now what weapons do you want to run? I've used this build with Anarchy and the 2 Area Denial GLs in Lost Signal and VS Velocity Baton, and it has worked very nicely. But this isn't the most practical setup. That being said, I do love to run at least 1 Area Denial Frame GL, so I would take Lost Signal with Autoloading Holster. And then in the heavy slot, Anarchy for the lovely tick damage. The beauty with this setup is Lost Signal can stun overloads with Overload Breach GL, and then Anarchy can stun unstops with kinetic impacts, but it can also stun barrier champs if you throw out your melee to proc Radiant, and this is massive. Most of the time, champion stunning perks override Radiant Anti-Barrier, but Kinetic Impacts does not. So we have talked about the special and heavy weapons, but for a primary, the star of the show is Vantage Point with Jolting Feedback. This weapon can apply Jolt to an enemy just after shooting enough shots. That is incredibly powerful in endgame content, so that's definitely my recommendation. And thanks to Unstoppable Pulse Rifle being in the artifact, it will always be overcharged. And you can also take advantage of Enhanced Ether Generator to make the origin trait even better. If you don't have Anarchy, then I recommend Deterministic Chaos. If you run this, I highly recommend running Void Holster because it's annoying as hell to reload. But just let me cook here for a minute. There is a world where you can have every damage over time effect on a boss. You could chuck out your melee to proc Unravel and apply Poison, as well as give yourself Radiant. If you weren't running Feed the Void, then you could have a Hellion and a Bleak Watcher on as well. So you could chuck out a Bleak Watcher and then cast your class ability for a Hellion turret. Now you're ticking the enemy to cause Slow and Freeze, which is enhanced with Facet of Ruin, and you're also applying Scorch and igniting it as well. Then you shoot it with your Jolting Feedback weapon to apply Jolt, and then you shoot it with Deterministic Chaos to apply Volatile. Or if you don't really care about the Volatile, then you can just shoot it with Anarchy to apply even more damage over time. And you keep chucking out your melee to reproc Radiant and reapply the poison thanks to it wearing off from the freezes from your Bleak Watcher. Personally, I would go with Anarchy and no Bleak Watcher. Yes, it is less damage over time effects overall, but it's still incredibly strong. So now you don't have to keep reapplying poison because of the Bleak Watcher freezing the enemy, and you can just let Anarchy tick away while you deal damage with another weapon such as your Jolting Feedback Pulse Rifle or your Lost Signal GL. On top of this season, Anarchy and Lost Signal can apply a 15% weaken debuff to enemies thanks to Concussive Reload. Sadly, most of the testing dummies I use are not strong enough to survive all these damage over time effects at once, so once again, I'm asking Bungie to please put a fucking testing ground in this game. We had one over 6 years ago in Season of Opulence, and frankly, it's ridiculous we don't have one yet. But anyways, you can just use your imagination. The point is, it really slaps. So yeah, there are many routes you can go with this build. Even if you don't care at all about damage over time from your weapons, so say you want to run a completely different weapon loadout to what I've suggested, this build is still going to put in amazing work. Like you could run Thorn or Osteostriga with Overload SMG, and now you can spread your poison from your weapon instead of having to rely on your melee. This is another great option as well. Just get creative with it. I just wanted to show off all the potential ways to use damage over time with this build. I always promote people making it their own and tailoring it to the content that they're running. But yeah, the base version of this setup with just the aspects and fragments will carry you like crazy. That's the beauty of it. It then allows you to run whatever weapons and mods that you want to. Anyways, that's it for the video. I hope you found it helpful and informative, and if you did, a like and subscription would be greatly appreciated. I have loved Necrotic Grip from the day they came out and farmed the hell out of a good roll back in the day. It's so nice to see them in their final form. Prismatic took this exotic to the next level, and I hope you enjoy running the build as much as I do. It's truly unique and powerful, and honestly, it works in any content that you want to take it into. But that's it from me. Thanks for watching if you're still here, and I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.